All right. So hopefully you got your coffee. You've said hi to the people that are showing up. And we're going to get to Austin Channing Brown in just a minute, I promise. I'm building so much anticipation, right? So much curiosity. Before we bring Austin in, I actually want to introduce you to someone else this morning, someone that you probably are already familiar with. You may not know his name, but you've probably seen him. But his name is Thomas Garvin. Sometimes he goes by Tommy Allgood, but I'm just going to call him Tommy or Thomas this morning. And you might recognize Thomas from being on stage occasionally at Watershed. Sometimes he's playing the cello, sometimes he's singing or doing some sort of spoken word. Maybe you've participated in a block or a dialogue that he's facilitated or led. And Tommy, are you there this morning?
I am here. How's it going?
Oh, there you are. And look at you, all sprawled out in your backyard. I'm so, I should have, well, I couldn't drive over there and be with you. I could have sat on the other side of the deck, right?
Stay back.
So you have been a part of this community now for, is it 4 years?
I think we're at 5.
5, yeah. And just real quick, I know you're there with. I'm assuming Chris is there with you, but you're a healthcare professional as well, and I mentioned that earlier. How you doing in all of that?
We're getting through. We're getting through. So I am on a little bit of a break. I go back Wednesday, provided I don't get sick. So I do work in like a critical care environment, so we have a bit more exposure. And then we're redistributing resources right now. And so as always, appreciate the prayers and the thoughts and the love, and everybody's been so wonderful and so supportive. So thank you all. And I decided today, like I've been in the hospital for a week almost, so let's just sit outside and enjoy church.
Sure. It sounds like you have a canine friend joining you as well.
Oh, okay. You can hear that? My bad.
Yeah. So it was literally a year ago, I think. Yeah, it was literally a year ago that, and you were here for this because you've been here for 5 years, where Watershed started dealing more honestly and openly with racism and white supremacy in our world and our culture, and even our Watershed culture. And part of how we started to deal with this was we started engaging our block community and our leaders, but really it took on a real steam, a real momentum when we did a series called Conciliation, the last weekend of which featured Austin Channing Brown. And one of the reasons I asked Tommy to be here this morning and be in this conversation with Austin was this time last year, you really, first of all, you stepped into some environments to help us have this conversation. I remember being in a room with you and like 20 people, and like the emotions really high on both ends or all ends of the spectrum, and just your willingness to step in and be a voice of peace, but then also asking some really honest questions. Our staff over the last year, and really during that 3 to 4 month period, just we would say in staff meetings sometime, I don't know what we would have done without you being a part of that. But also in the aftermath of those conversations, something formed that now you and I are a part of, and a few other folks here at Watershed are a part of. And I thought that might be worth mentioning as well. Can you take a minute to kind of talk about some of the work that has been going on?
So we actually, right after the Conciliation series, got the opportunity to start a diversity and inclusion committee team. And that has actually been really awesome. We weren't sure at first what it would look like. And so, but what it's actually become is this really beautiful team that kind of holds the community, Watershed, the leadership accountable in terms of issues of diversity and inclusion, being anti-racist, anti-sexist. And so we get to like interrogate essentially Watershed's policies and practices to make sure that we're stepping into this work of anti-racism, anti-sexism, being an actual inclusive environment, and also being accessible to those who we previously were not accessible to.
No, that's well said. And I think we might get into a little bit of some of the conversations we've already had when Austin joins us. So, but I wanted to make that connection as we hear from her this morning, because first of all, I wanted Watershed to know that, like, there's been under the surface, there has been movement. It's been slow. It's been wildly illuminating. But then also this Tuesday evening at 7 p.m., Thomas and I are going to co-host a Zoom Q&A around whatever is said this morning, and then maybe a few other things that are going on in the world or in the Watershed culture. And so I wanted you to be familiar with him this morning. I know, again, you've probably seen him here and there on stage or in some of these other environments, but he's just so good in these spaces. And if you want to be a part of that Q&A, again, you can either email me, Matt O'Neill at watershed.charlotte.com, or there should be a link to click on in the comment section or somewhere where this is posted on Sunday. And you have to sign up because we're having to cap it at around 50 people. You sign up, we'll send you the Zoom link sometime probably by lunch on Tuesday. And then we're just going to dive in on Tuesday night at 7 and see where that leads us. So I'm going to, in just a moment, I'm going to bring Austin into the picture here. But I want to, before she comes, I want to read a preview of her first book. It's called I'm Still Here. Again, if you were here last year, you've probably either read it, you're at least familiar with it, or you heard the live version of it at some level when she spoke on a Saturday and a Sunday. But this is a description of this work that she did, this book that she wrote. It says, in a time when nearly all institutions, schools, churches, universities, businesses claim to value diversity in their mission statements, I'm Still Here is a powerful account of how and why our actions so often fall short of our words. Austin writes in breathtaking detail about her journey to self-worth and the pitfalls that kill our attempts at racial justice in stories that bear witness to the complexity of America's social fabric, from Black Cleveland neighborhoods to private schools in the middle-class suburbs, from prison walls to the boardrooms at majority white organizations. For readers who have engaged with America's legacy on race, I'm Still Here is an illuminating look at how white middle-class evangelicism has participated in an era of rising racial hostility, inviting the reader to confront apathy, recognize God's ongoing work in the world, and discover how Blackness, if we let it, can save us all. Good morning, Austin Channing Brown. Are you there?
Good morning.
All right.
Can you hear me?
We can, and I can. Thank you for joining us this morning. How are you holding up? It's Michigan, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is cold and gray, and it's I keep seeing posts about how grateful people are, at least for the sunshine.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what sunshine? Is there sunshine?
The sun
I see cloud.
The sun doesn't shine till like at least April or May in Michigan, right?
I've got months. I've got at least like 4 weeks to go.
There you go. There you go. Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I remember when you were with us the last time, I think it was you and I on stage, you said, no one's ever invited me back. And I'm like, oh, you don't know how type A this community is.
Well, now I'm going to say it everywhere I go.
There you go.
It'll just be a challenge.
Yeah. Well, and this isn't what I had in mind, to be quite frank, right?
I'm grateful anyway. I'm so
there
grateful.
You go. Well, listen, can we just dive in? Because
Yes.
We're dying to hear some things from you. Your work here last year is still reverberating. It's still ricocheting in our hearts and our minds. So much of what you said, probably one of the more jarring moments, and I'm going to speak from my own experience here, after hearing you talk for 2 days, talking to a packed house on a Saturday night, and then again on Sunday morning. You were sitting next to me on stage, and you asked this incredibly jarring question. You said, how would anyone know if Watershed was an anti-racist church? And I just remember, first of all, feeling completely paralyzed in the moment, but in my head, sort of my interior voice, the first thing I remember thinking was, I have no idea. I don't know how anyone would know that. I'm glad you thought that was funny, because I was like freaking out. But then the second thing was, I don't get it, because I was under the impression that we weren't racist to begin with.
Right.
Can you start there and talk about the problematic nature of those two responses and just go?
Sure. So I don't think the first response is problematic.
Yeah.
I think the first response is honest, and honest is not problematic.
Yeah.
Honest is opportunity for change, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to say, I have no idea. I have no idea how I would know this, is a honest place to begin. And I think there are a lot of predominantly white organizations, churches, workplaces, education spaces, that believe that if they're not actively discriminating against people of color, that they are then inherently anti-racist. And I think part of the message that I'm trying to send through that question is that anti-racism isn't a default position. You can't default your way into anti-racism. You have to choose to be anti-racist.
Can you talk a little bit? Can you sort of give some definition of terms? Mm-hmm. And Thomas, I really would welcome you weighing in on this too. The idea of someone being racist. That can you talk about what racism actually is, and then talk about what anti-racism actually is, and kind of delineate between those two terms?
Yeah, so racism is the water we're all swimming in. It's as the world turns, especially here in America, but really globally. But here in America, the default position in America is racism. So a lot of white people, when they start thinking about race, think about it as an interpersonal relationship. And so the question is Matt being racist towards Austin? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's an individual choice.
Right, exactly. And that could be one component of racism. So you could right now call me the N-word. You could right now you could interview another white person and give that white person more time than you give me. You could, you could do things that actively discriminate against me because I am Black. But that's not the only form of racism. As you look at America, any place that you see racial inequity is an example of racism. So, for example, if you look at the number of people who are imprisoned, you will see a racial disparity. The only way that racial disparity makes sense is if you believe that Black people and brown people are inherently more criminal than white people. If you don't believe that, then the racial disparities in the prison system don't make any sense. And that's how we know it's racism. You could look at home ownership. You could look at income. You could look at health disparities. You could look at home ownership. You could look at education. But there are all kinds of places in America where these inequalities exist, and that is racism. And we have to figure out as a community, do we care not just about interpersonal acts of racism, but do we care about systemic racism?
Yeah. So you're talking about policy and so much of what I've been benefiting from of late, in addition to your work, but Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be Anti-Racist, is so good. And in it, he argues the point of when we need to stop looking at the word racist as a pejorative, right? And start looking at it truly as what it's intended to do, is to be a descriptor or to describe a situation, an act, interpersonal, or a policy, systemic, that is actually upholding racism. But in that also, he talked about sort of this spectrum of being racist, anti-racist, and then an assimilationist. Can you speak into that a little bit?
Yeah, so a lot of this becomes more clear when we take a step back and go to our historic extremes, right? Because the further we get away from how America started, the more muddled things become. But when we go back to the extremes of where we started, suddenly light bulbs start going off, okay? So when people who were enslaved were brought to America, there was a deep belief that those African people and their descendants could not become human, could not become as good as white people. They were not ever going to be that intelligent. They weren't ever going to be good business people. In fact, even in white churches, there was an argument that enslaved people didn't even have a soul, that they literally were not human. There was another school of thought for those who were indigenous. White people saw indigenous people and thought, I think these folks do have a soul, but if they become more like us, then maybe they could rise to the occasion. So if we teach them about our way of being, if we make them dress the way we want to dress, if we make them sing songs that we approve of, if we give them language that makes them sound more like us, then they could assimilate their way into being really great humans like us. Those are both extremes, right? But it's not hard to see how that continues to play out in our normal interactions right now. So white churches often think that their, let's go with music, that their music is wonderful. It is theologically driven. It is applicable to all humans. Everyone will raise their hands as the music plays. But we're only going to play gospel music on MLK Day. So when I have worship leaders come in, they need to be able, even if they're African American, they need to be able to sing Toby Mac. They need to be able to, they need to be able to sing whatever songs that we sing, the songs that we have deemed as culturally relevant, the songs we have deemed as the best worship songs, the songs we have approved of that we think are theologically correct, and everybody needs to learn those.
Okay.
But we're gonna save the gospel music for a really special occasion because not everybody needs that. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, yeah. What about if somebody says in that space, well, I'm just not familiar with that style, or that's not my comfort zone, right?
Yeah, yeah. So this is where we get into the idea of whiteness as normal. And for people of color, gospel music is normal, or singing in Mandarin is normal, or singing in Spanish is normal, right? And there's this double standard. So you get people of color, you invite people of color to help lead the worship service, right? So now you have vocalists and drummers who are a part of your worship service. And the expectation is that they will learn the music that all the white folks have grown up listening to and have known forever, the music that is normal for them. But at no point are the white worship leaders expected to learn the Spanish song. They're not expected to become pros at the gospel music. They're not expected, right? That
Yeah,
there's an
absolutely.
expectation that the black and brown vocalists will adjust and become normalized, will assimilate into white culture, but there is no expectation that white culture will say, oh, all these other cultural elements are an important part of who God is, and therefore should be an important part of who I am.
So our staff started plowing through how to be an anti-racist a couple of months ago. Mm-hmm. And when we started, I remember reading about the idea of being an assimilationist. It was like a whole new layer got peeled back for all of us. I mean, we couldn't stop talking about it. And I remember thinking back throughout previous times in my life, and even more recently over the last 10 years in the work that I do here, thinking that somehow if I could just work with an individual or work with a group of people and help them become fill in the blank, more disciplined, more informed, better educated. And I was telling Thomas this the other day, there was this weird, if I'm really honest with myself, there was this weird feeling about all of that I couldn't name, but it almost felt like you were pushing water uphill and trying to create something that really wasn't fair to create. And I didn't have any of that language. And it was like the space of this assimilationist space, we started to realize was drenched in meritocracy, individualism, and this status quo notion. Can you talk for just a moment about the danger of that space, either personally or culturally or socially? It feels like an unnamed, unaware space. I didn't realize that was even a space to exist.
Yeah, so there was a church that I belonged to for a while. That was a predominantly white church that claimed that it really wanted to be diverse. And so I joined this church and started participating. And every now and again, the leadership of the church would say, Austin, you have so much leadership potential. You have so much potential. And at first, Matt, I was like, oh, okay. I think I do too, right? And the longer I was there, the more I realized what they meant wasn't, Austin, we see you as you are, and we see that you have potential to bring new ideas and new thoughts and new perspectives to what we're doing. We love you as you are, and we see great value in how you're different from us. What they meant was, oh, you could become white like us. We really think that we could teach you how to give a sermon the way we would give a sermon. And we think we can teach you how to lead a service the way we would lead a service. And we think we could teach you how to speak the way we speak. And as long as I was buying into that, as long as I was willing to do my best to be like them, we were all good. But as soon as I started to say, but I think there's value in the way that I talk. I think there's value in the way that I preach. I think there's value in the songs that I sing. Then I became a problem. And the way that was said was never outright. Nobody ever walked up to me and said, Austin, you are a problem. The way it was phrased was always, we're afraid that you're not a cultural fit. We're afraid you're not a fit here, right? And that is like corporate language. What I mean by that is it's not just churches saying that, right? That there are people of color who hear that everywhere they go. You're not a fit here. And what they mean is you're not enough like us. You haven't assimilated enough. And it is heartbreaking. It can erode your self-esteem. And as a Black person who's on the receiving end of that, I will share very vulnerably that I felt like I was losing myself at that church. Really specific example. In the Black church, when you pray all together, out loud, everybody. It's like a song. And
Amen.
One voice,
Amen.
Right? And there's one voice, usually Tommy's, that will rise above everyone else. But through the whole prayer, you can hear Mama Johnson on the front row, and you can hear the choir backing up the preacher, but everybody is praying at once. In this church, everybody prayed like this. Dear Jesus, thank you so much for this beautiful sunny day. And I was like, okay, well, that's a little different. That's not how we do it where I come from, but I can learn, right? So for a couple years, I learned to pray like that. I then went back to my parents' church where I grew up, and I remember sitting in the pew thinking, please don't call on me to pray. Please don't call on me to pray. Please don't call on me to pray. Because I wasn't sure I could do it anymore, y'all. I hadn't practiced that cadence. I hadn't been doing it in such a long time that I was actually afraid to participate in a Black church service again. And in that moment, I was so frightened of who I had become. I wasn't myself anymore.
That's so profound, and I think not just think, but like you're really speaking to part of why it's so important to have these conversations in the church space, in all church spaces, where they're I'm reading Barbara Holmes' book right now, Joy Unspeakable, and it talks about the contemplative practices in the Black church. And so much of what we miss when we expect people to assimilate are these rich traditions that other cultures bring us of how they interact and experience God. Yeah. And so what kind of pushback do you get when you go into the church space and say, well, why do we have to talk about racism? God loves everybody. Like, what are we missing when we don't talk about it?
Yeah. There is, first of all, I love that I can hear birds in here. It makes me so happy.
Right? All God's creatures sing, right?
It makes me so happy. Church service outdoors from now on. So we have to begin to interrogate what we really believe about church, about God, about community. What do we really believe? Because if we really believed that God created everyone equal, if we really believe that, and that all of our culture reflects God. So Mama Johnson sitting on the church pew singing "His Eye is on the Sparrow" matters just as much as the production of a white, young, contemporary band. If we really believe that these two individuals and their ways of being are equal, why in the world would we cast Mama Johnson to the side? Right? The idea that God loves everybody doesn't diminish the need for anti-racism, it increases the need for anti-racism. If that's what we say we believe, then we also believe that we are missing a part of who God is when we ask everybody to become one way.
So, yes, amen, amen. Go ahead, Matt.
Thanks. So part of what I think I understand about this space of being an assimilationist is, without realizing it, when you live there, and I love what Kendi does. He says, it's pretty clear who the racists are. He said, and it might even be really clear who the anti-racists are. But this assimilationist space, because it functions out of a place of I am not racist versus I am striving to be anti-racist, there's an ongoing propping up of the status quo experience, which what I understand is whiteness is normal. Whatever white culture creates, like that's the starting point, and we're all supposed to, without even realizing it, you're asleep to it. And I think Tommy and I, part of this diversity inclusivity group, there was a document that we were sent. I think Tommy might have sent it, but it was a spectrum of here's the racist side of the spectrum, here's the anti-racist side of the spectrum. Right. And I remember looking at this, and then like these varying developmental clicks towards being anti-racist.
Sure.
What the most clarifying moment over the last 8 months was, I have a map. This is a map. And it shows me and it shows us where we are. And when I was really honest about where we are, it was awful. It was like, oh my God, like I don't want to, I want to be, first of all, I don't know if I'll ever be all the way over here, but I've got 25, 30 years if I'm lucky. How far can I begin to progress? And how far can our community begin to progress? How do we inform ourselves about how to move towards this space of no longer propping up the status quo? And then the what's at stake in all of that. And I don't know if you have any experience with churches like ours, but the thing that makes it feels like there's an added wrinkle in it for us, because we view ourselves as progressive, and so theologically, like music in general doesn't work. Like the things that we like the music, the way that we understand the story and the theology. It feels like it's changing in real time. And by the way, culturally, because you're trying to move towards anti-racism. So I know I said a bunch of stuff there. By the way, like part of why we're so jacked up now is because of you. So thank you for that. But what would you say to do you have experiences with churches who not only they're trying to do this work, but the theological thing is evolving as well? What would you say to that? Or maybe you have that experience personally. I don't know.
Well, I honestly think it's important to have both. I'm not sure that you can stick to your theological guns and just decide this is it forever and always. This is the doctrine. This is where I'm living. and expect to have a cultural shift on anything, right? And so I would actually be more concerned if you were saying, Austin, we really want to move forward, but here's these 3 Bible verses that are going to be a problem for us. It requires, when I travel, I often say that the pursuit of anti-racism or practicing anti-racism is going to lead to transformation. It's not, and in some ways, I think maybe it requires transformation, but what I know for sure is that it leads to transformation, that nothing will be the same. And that can be scary, but it can also be really exciting. And what I hear as you speak about it is excitement, like, oh, here's where we are, but this isn't where I want to be. I want to be over there. I want to get to that point. Where is the end of the rainbow? Because that's what I'm chasing. Anti-racism work doesn't always have to be sad and overwhelming and right? That anti-racism work can be fun and creative and joyful and an opportunity for discovery. And I was at a church the other day, and I said to the folks who were gathered with me, can you imagine, to all the Black people in particular who were sitting there, can you imagine being a Christian and having never heard Fred Hammond and Kirk Franklin and CeCe Winans? Like, can you even wrap your mind around having made it through all the things you've made it through without having these towering voices in your life? And all the Black people were like, no, like, no, I cannot imagine that. And then I said, there are white people in your life, like white Christians in your life, who are having a hard time and have no idea they could be listening to a Fred Hammond song right now. like imagine that. Imagine that they have no idea they could just turn on Kirk Franklin and have like a Holy Ghost moment in their house right now while everything is falling up, right? That's a kind of a silly example, but that's what I mean. That anti-racism work in which we can all be ourselves and we all have something to bring to the table means that I get to partake of music and artists and understandings of theology and books and ideas and concepts and worldviews that I never would have known existed otherwise. And that's an enrichment to my life, not a detriment. That doesn't take away from who I am. It adds to who I am, and it adds to my understanding of God too.
Barbara Holmes talks about sort of she talks about that distinction between the individual experience and the collective experience, and then the experiences in the hush arbors, and just this rich depth of suffering, and then couple that with a James Cone and your liberation theology, when we're not adjacent or proximate, as Brian Stevenson would use the term. That's
right.
To people who are different from us, who are culturally different from us. We miss out on the stories of their suffering and how they navigate through those suffering. And so therefore we miss out on a benefit to us. And so I think through this time, what I'm seeing, I see Black and brown people who are deeply, deeply fearful of COVID-19.
That's right.
But I see them moving about it a little bit differently.
That's right.
Do you see any correlation within that? And then also, can we talk about some of, you posted on social media the other day, as we were talking, people were talking about COVID-19 and the economy and sacrificing older people. And now I'm beginning to see articles pop up about how that disproportionately disenfranchises or affects Black and brown people specifically. And I think that you have to understand, especially from a critical race theory perspective, that racism and the economy are so connected with each other. So can we talk about that for a little bit?
Oh my goodness. So if we begin with, again, the idea that America is inherently racist, like it has been racist. America as we know it, right? Is when you begin with slavery before you're even a formed country, that's a problem. Right? And for centuries, there was an economic reasoning for why, even if you morally disagreed with slavery, it had to be kept. If you get rid of slavery, the economy will collapse. If you get rid of slavery, America will no longer be able to export X, Y, and Z. If you get rid of slavery, we won't be able to produce at the same level. Businesses will suffer. Can you imagine having to pay millions of people who are enslaved? Right? There was an economic theory for why slavery had to continue. So from the beginning, capitalism has required that we value more bodies than other bodies. So it's okay to work some people to death for the sake of these other folks over here who are more important, more valuable to society. That same argument is what is being applied now to folks who are elderly, who are immunocompromised, who are more vulnerable to COVID than others. It's the exact same argument. What's most important are our businesses. What's most important are business owners. And if that means there's a certain population that has to die,
it's collateral damage.
It is the core of the argument is the same. And we have to decide as a country, we have to decide as communities, as neighborhoods, certainly as churches, is that what we believe? Do we believe that there are some people who are more valuable to society than others, and it is therefore acceptable to sacrifice the bodies that are not as valuable?
That's so good. And when we think about I think about the community of Watershed, there's a diverse range of perspectives and opinions and leanings. But we've truly been sold this lie about, well, we have to have a strong economy to support people. And truly, when we look at it in a deeply spiritual sense, people are the economy. Yes. And so if we're taking care of people, if we're taking care of each other, then I think we are walking adjacent and journeying with God. That is the story of a Jesus. It was the least of these.
Y'all, let me tell you about this email that I got recently. So I had written about this because it really made me upset when people started talking about, we're just gonna let folks die. And so I wrote about it, and I received an email in response from a retired pastor who I think she said was in her late 60s, white. And she said, Austin, I really appreciate that you would value me as much as you would value anyone else. She said, but what I'm concerned about is that saving me means greater injustice to Black and brown poor people who are already struggling. And if sacrificing me means that Black and brown people who are already struggling can participate in a more robust economy, maybe that's okay. I was like, oh my God. No, 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 no. Here's the problem with even that, as sweet and sacrificial and kind and generous as that is, here's the problem. If we keep the economy as it is, Black and brown poor folks are still going to be poor. Because we're not talking about transforming the economy. We're not talking about rethinking the economy. We're not talking about undoing, rebuilding, restructuring, changing, making our economy anti-racist. So this woman is really considering whether or not she should support sacrificing herself, considering herself less valuable to society than Black and brown poor people. And that sacrifice isn't going to save Black and brown poor people. Does that make sense?
It's just going to return it to the reality it was before all of this happened.
Exactly.
It resets the operating system, but we never got rid of the virus.
Exactly. And until we get rid of the virus, that some people are more valuable than others,
yeah,
we're just going to repeat this over and over and over again and become comfortable with the idea of death. And friends, Jesus already did that.
Amen.
Jesus already did that. Like,
yes.
Isn't that why we come together? Because Jesus already died. we are supposed to be people of life and of possibility and impossibility. And I wish that we would be radical thinkers who believe with every fiber of our being, and therefore with our policy recommendations, that every single person is valuable. And the reason we put more emphasis on poor people, on queer people, on Black and brown bodies isn't because they're more valuable. We do that because we recognize that we're trying to correct an inequality.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to correct an inequality. But allowing the elders to die doesn't correct an inequality. Right?
Wisdom dies with that, right?
Right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm seeing a lot of problematic theology when it comes to how we deal with COVID-19.
Not just that, even in terms of my Chinese brothers and siblings and my Asian siblings, there's so much racism directed towards them right now. And we just need to be very careful in our words and how, and even in our jokes, are they disenfranchising people? Are they upholding notions and thoughts that make people have to face hate and danger to their actual being and lives?
Now, y'all, I get a lot of hate mail. I get people who argue with me all day long, friends. So somebody disagreeing with me is not a shock to my system. Right? Yeah. But I was genuinely surprised by how much pushback I got about this issue. That when I said, maybe we should think about calling it COVID-19 and not the Wuhan virus and not the Chinese virus and not like, let's stop giving the virus an ethnicity and call it COVID-19, which is how scientists are referring to it. The level of pushback that I got was unreal to me. And I think part of it is, one, because we live in a racist society. And until we interrogate that, our default is to continue being racist. And one of the things we do, one of these assimilationist things that we do is say, well, this is the way it's always been done. I mean, we call it the Spanish flu, we call it MERS, we call it, like, this is what we've always done. But that's not how anti-racism thinks. Anti-racism thinks, how can we do this better? My intentions don't really matter a whole lot. If the impact means that our Asian siblings are afraid to leave their homes, not because of the virus, but because they're afraid of being attacked by their neighbors.
Yeah.
That should be reason enough. That's all I need to know. That's all I need to know. If the impact of my words means that somebody has to be more afraid to live their daily lives, that's all I need to know to change my behavior.
That statement, Tommy has made that statement to me on numerous occasions, that, you know, I understand what you think you were trying to do, but you have to measure the impact. And, you know, as part of the interrogative process over the last 6 months, I think recognizing that, all right, as we address our mindset as a community, as we try to impact our structure and our practices, seeing our culture shift, recognizing it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We're going to screw this up, but we have to, accountability has to be a part of the process, both organizationally. And so we're working more and more, and Tommy has been, Tommy and some of these other folks that have raised their hand to do this have been just amazing at helping us even build out what does that look like from an official standpoint in our community. Talk just a little bit at an individual level. I know that you have been a part of creating resources over the last year. I've watched some of the stuff that you've done. Can you kind of talk about some of the supplemental things that you're creating or that you have created that our folks could connect into as we all continue to try to move the needle in the direction towards being anti-racist?
Oh, for sure. So one of my favorite projects is The Next Question, which a lot of your community members are already familiar with.
Yeah.
But we hadn't filmed it when I was with you all. So now all of the episodes are online. We did episodes with Nicole Hannah-Jones, the journalist who led the 1619 Project. We interviewed Brene Brown on vulnerability and what that looks like for people of color. We did an episode on the criminal justice system. I mean, just all across the board, because we know, as we've talked about, that anti-racism is work everywhere, right? In all facets of our lives. And so that was a lot of fun to do. And then you
attacked the notion that the Black experience is a monolithic experience, and really talked about the spectrum of the Black experience.
So it was so much fun, because there were some episodes that are super academic and like filled with history, and I was like, where is my notepad? And then there are others that are just like
low-key me too.
You know what I mean? Like, man, I was rewatching them for the editing, and I was like, oh, let me get my phone out. Let me tweet that.
Particularly the episode with Brene Brown and Chi-Chi, like my heart just ached and was like moved, and I sobbed all at the same. It was so good. Community.
The level of vulnerability that Chi-Chi brings to the show, she just blows me away. I'm a little bit obsessed with her. So check that out. It's free. It's at tnqshow.com. Watch it anytime. And then I think on our homepage there are also links to our TNQ homework. So if there's an episode that you really loved, there's more resources to sort of dive deeper into that conversation.
Yeah.
I'm really proud of that. And then the newest project that I've been working on in light of COVID-19, in light of our pandemic that we're all just living through right now, is a newsletter subscription through Substack. And there's a free subscription that anybody can join. But on a Monday, I'm starting a new portion that's just for subscribers. That's called Ask Austin. And it's an advice column. And so every week I'll answer like 3 questions from anonymous sources and give my opinion on them. And hopefully, eventually, I'll also bring in other experts to answer questions that I can't. But I'm really looking forward to just seeing how that grows, because there are so many people who are so scared to ask questions about anti-racism. And so I hope this will be a place for discussion and sharing and stories, so that we all feel just a little less alone in our journey, especially right now.
Oh, thank
There's
you.
one last question that I have. And I think I might be beating Matt to the punch here on this one, but
It's all you, bud. It's all you. Go for it.
As we were talking about COVID-19, the times that we're living in, we talked about sort of the spiritual virus that we face, but it truly feels like we're in a period of literal suffering and death. And so with that, with Easter right around the corner, with us having to adjust tradition and how we do things, I know one of your big passions is speaking directly to women of color. So what encouragement in the context of this notion of Easter and resurrection, being what does resurrection mean to you? What encouragement would you have for the women of color, and also specifically, just because I know that's an area of, that's like a specific gift that you have, and then also for the rest of our community here. And just thank you so much for just sharing your heart and for being here with us today. But let's make that question.
My pleasure. So this year in particular, when I think about resurrection, the first word that comes to mind is possibility. Like possibility. Because there was a moment when Jesus hung on the cross and breathed his last. And that was supposed to be the end of the story. There was nothing else except to take down his body and wrap it up and put it in a tomb. That was supposed to be it. But then there's this miraculous thing that happens called resurrection, this impossible thing where Jesus is risen. That is a story that I need desperately right now. That this is awful. That this needs to be grieved. That we have missed birthday parties. We are saying goodbye to loved ones. My parents have not been able to hug their grandchild in longer than they've ever had to go without, right? Like there are people dealing with disappointments. There are people who can't visit their sick loved ones. Like there is so much grief. There is extraordinarily high unemployment. Like the world feels like it's falling apart. Like this could be the end. But we have a story in which we can grieve that feeling that this is all over and still believe in the possibility that something extraordinary could happen. And that would be my encouragement to Watershed. that if we believe something extraordinary is still possible, then maybe there is still time to love. And maybe there is still time to practice justice. And maybe there is still time to say, I love you. And maybe there is still time to defend the most vulnerable. Because maybe, just maybe, even in the midst of heart-wrenching grief, something new is possible.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I don't even want to say a whole lot after that, because that's just so wonderful. I know I speak for our community. I know I speak for folks beyond our community, because I know there's people watching this that may or may not even be a part of who Watershed is. But thank you for being courageous enough to step into spaces that I can't even imagine what it must be like for you. Thank you for being so generous and meeting with us. No space has ever invited you back 3 times. So
I'm ready.
You're ready. I hear a challenge, but please be safe up there in Michigan and warm. You have a community here in Charlotte that believes in what you're doing, is for you, and we're going to continue to support you as your work changes this world. Thank you so much this morning, Austin.
It is such a pleasure to be with you all. I miss being able to travel. And so this is the next best thing. And I'm grateful that you all would invite me.
Well, thank you.
I just have to say, on a personal level, this reunion has been phenomenal. So me and Austin go back, y'all. We tight.
The love is real.
Thank you again, Austin. Blessings and just the deepest expressions of gratitude to your family for letting us steal some time from you, and have a great week. Can I just pick your brain for just a second? I know we've been going quite a long time, so I want to be mindful of everybody's time, but can you just, what's one thing that stood out for you in that?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if it's just one thing that stood out for me, or if it's just being an Enneagram 2, the refreshment of sitting with a friend, and a friend that gets it, a friend that is doing the work, a friend that is not afraid to be vulnerable, to be honest. And so for me, it's really personal to have Austin here, to in the sense of she's taught me so a lot, and she's been a guide, and so and she showed me ways in which I was walking about in a lot of this assimilating instead of being anti-racist. And so every time I get to hear her speak, it's just fortification for me to find that voice of pushing the boundaries, or the perceived boundaries that really white supremacy has imposed, and said, well, no, I think that we can do things a different way. I think that we can do things better. But not just that, there's always the invitation. And I think the biggest hurdle for people is getting over, oh my gosh, I'm racist. Well, technically everybody is, right? And so, because that is the water that we are swimming in. And so we all have our work to actively dismantle white supremacy and patriarchy and all the other isms, sexism, homophobia, all those things outside of us, because it is the water that we swim in. And I just think she has a beautiful way of holding space for those conversations. And so I hope that everybody watching online in the community got just as much benefit as I did, and that you enjoyed all of the sounds of nature.
So, man, what's exciting for me is you said so much more just in that statement. Part of what I think will be a really awesome experience on Tuesday night is leaning in even more. When you as a person of color say things like I didn't realize that I lived in the space of assimilation. That I remember someone else. I remember Kendi talking about that, and that was like mind blowing. So maybe on Tuesday night you could say more about that, because I think that would be interesting for people to hear. The thing that stood out for me was I'm sitting here and I'm having this experience of I need to hear this. This is true, and I'm also acknowledging there are people who might be where I was 2 years ago, having to embrace this or having to sit with the tension. So I think that's the thing that stood out. No matter where you are in the spectrum, there's always going to be tension to hold. Yeah. So I think part of what I feel like we are built for in this community is existing in that space with deep honesty and care and compassion. Like, we're always trying to get better at that. But what you get invited to as you move into this community is there's a lot you get invited to, but disruption and holding that space is one of them. You can't reclaim, transform, and be a part of liberation without holding space of tension. And so thank you on a personal level.
Just on that, when we talk about holding those things, my invitation is that you're not alone. You don't have to hold that alone. The purpose of the D&I committee and this board and what we're growing into, what we are becoming, is to walk alongside of you in that tension, right? It's not to say do it yet. Yes, there is a measure that you have to show up, that you have to commit to the work, that you have to commit to being different, but you don't have to do it alone. And so even though you were there, and even though these conversations can be uncomfortable, my invitation is don't run away from it. Lean into it and let us walk alongside of you, because that is what we are built for as a community.
Well, and you beat me to the punch, because that's been my experience for 15 years now as one of the pastors here. That's been my experience with you as a friend. And I feel like who we are as a community, there is something new being born here. There is some sense of resurrection taking place. And so thank you again for your willingness to be in this with me today. Birds and dogs and trains, all of that, right? There's a train going off in behind me, and I'm like, oh, dear Lord, please, not a train whistle. Can I kind of just bring our time to a close by praying? Would you be okay with that?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And so, God, thank you that resurrection it's a story. It's true, literal, non-literal, mythic. The bottom line is that only after something dies can something be resurrected. And so as we watch things literally die over the next several weeks, ideas and comforts and securities, may we trust in what Austin said, that there is the possibility of something new. And may we do this together in light of what Tommy has said. We love you, God. It's in Christ's name I pray. Tom, I'll see you Tuesday night, right?
See y'all Tuesday.
All right. You guys have a great day. Stay safe, 6 feet apart. We love you. We'll see you soon.